before Asgard was the fortress you know. Before Odin had his ravens, his spear, or the wisdom he paid his eye to obtain. Before the Norse gods existed as a single unified pantheon, there were two tribes of gods who hated each other, and they went to war. The Aesir were gods of battle, law, and the sky. The Vanir were masters of nature, fertility, and a kind of magic so powerful it could bend reality without lifting a weapon. Two different ideas about what divine power was supposed to look like. Two different worlds that shared the same cosmos, and neither was willing to yield to the other. The war they fought was the first war in the entire Norse cosmos. But what most people never ask is this: how did it end? Not with a winner, not with a loser, with a deal so strange, so unlike anything in any other mythology that it changed the nature of the Norse gods permanently. And the price of that peace was a severed head that kept talking for centuries. The Norse cosmos was not built on peace. It was built on the tension between opposites, order and chaos, ice and fire, the civilized and the wild. Everything in the 9 worlds existed in a kind of permanent, precarious balance, and the two tribes of gods reflected that structure perfectly. The Aesir lived in Asgard, the fortress realm above the world tree Yggdrasil. Their gods were the ones you already know. Odin, the All-Father, god of wisdom, war, and death. Thor, the thunder god, protector of mankind. Tyr, the one-handed god of justice and law. The Aesir understood power as something you built, defended, and enforced. They were warrior kings. Their world had walls for a reason. The Vanir came from Vanaheim, a realm of living forests, deep water, and wild fertility. Their gods were different in every way. Njord, god of the sea and winds, who could calm a storm by looking at it. His son Freyr, who made crops grow and animals multiply, who brought abundance wherever he went. And his daughter Freya, the most complex figure in the Vanir pantheon. A goddess of love and desire, yes, but also of war, of death, of a form of magic called Seder that the Aesir found both irresistible and deeply threatening. Seder was the problem. It was a practice of fate-weaving, of seeing what was coming and reshaping it. The Aesir had their own forms of power, their weapons, and their oaths, and their runes. But Seder operated outside all of that. It did not respect walls or armies or the structures that gave the Aesir their authority. It went around them, and that made it dangerous in a way that a sword never could be. For a long time, the two tribes kept their distance. The cosmos was large enough. Then the Vanir sent an ambassador to Asgard, and everything that followed came from what the Aesir did to her. Her name was Gullveig. Some sources call her Heid. She arrived in Asgard as a practitioner of cider, and what happened next is one of the most violent acts in the entire Norse mythological record. The Aesir seized her. They ran spears through her body. They threw her into the fire in Odin's own hall and burned her. She came back. They burned her again. She came back again. They burned her a third time. She rose from the ash for the third time, and she was unchanged. The same woman, the same magic, untouched by everything they had done to her. The Voluspa, the oldest and most authoritative Norse poem, records this moment as the spark that lit the war. The Aesir had tried to destroy something they did not understand 3 times, in the most final ways available to them. And it had not worked. What they had actually done was demonstrate to both sides that Vanir power could not be overcome by Aesir methods. The Vanir responded. They marched on Asgard, and where the Aesir relied on physical strength, fortifications, and martial discipline, the Vanir used Seder to do something that should have been impossible. They breached the walls, not by battering them down, by using the reality-shifting power of their magic to simply make the walls no longer an obstacle. The walls of Asgard, The symbol of everything the Aesir had built proved vulnerable to the one thing they could not fight directly. The Vanir did not need to break through. They unmade the barrier entirely. And when the walls of Asgard fell, the golden age of divine security ended with them. The war went back and forth for a long time. The Aesir were stronger in direct combat. Thor's hammer cleared Vanir warriors from the field whenever he entered it. Odin's spear Gungnir, which he threw over the host of the Vanir at the war's opening, had become the ritual gesture that began every Norse battle from that point forward. The Aesir knew how to fight a war. They had been built for it. But the Vanir could not be cornered. Their manipulation of nature and fate meant they could choose when to engage and when to dissolve back into the wild places of the cosmos. They could make the land itself hostile to an Aesir advance. They could see what the Aesir were planning before the Aesir had finished planning it. Every time the warrior gods thought they had the advantage, it slipped away. The stalemate dragged on, and here is the detail that the Norse sources are most honest about. Neither side was winning. The Aesir could not destroy the Vanir. The Vanir could not conquer Asgard permanently. The war was consuming the cosmos. Crops were not growing. Seas were not calm. The natural order which the Vanir sustained just by existing was deteriorating because the Vanir were focused on war instead. The gods of battle and the gods of nature had reached the same conclusion at the same moment. The cost of continuing was higher than the cost of stopping. They called a truce. And then they did something that had never been done before in any mythology in any part of the world. They held a summit, both sides, in the same place with no weapons drawn, and they negotiated. The treaty was sealed in the strangest way imaginable. Both sides approached a great vat and spat into it. Every god present, Aesir and Vanir both. The act was deliberate and specific. It was a merging of their divine essences, a physical combining of what they each were, preserved in a single vessel. You could not get more binding than that. You had put yourself into the agreement literally. From that combined spit, something happened that had no precedent anywhere in Norse mythology. A being emerged. His name was Kvasir, and Kvasir was the wisest creature that had ever existed in the 9 worlds. Not wise in the way Odin was wise, which was wisdom bought at enormous personal cost through sacrifice and suffering. Kvasir was wise simply because he contained the essence of every god from both pantheons simultaneously. He knew everything any of them knew. He could answer any question. He walked through the 9 worlds and shared his knowledge freely, because there was no question he could not answer and no reason to withhold what he understood. The Norse tradition does not let Kvasir live long. He was eventually murdered by 2 dwarves who drained his blood into 3 vessels and mixed it with honey to create the mead of poetry. Anyone who drank it became a skald, a poet, capable of speaking with divine eloquence. The mead passed through many hands and many thefts before Odin finally stole it back for the gods. But that is a story for another episode. The point is what Kvasir represented. The peace treaty between the Aesir and Vanir did not just end a war. It created something new, a being who was neither one thing nor the other. A god who existed because 2 opposing forces had chosen to stop destroying each other. That is what the Norse tradition said peace was capable of producing. Not just an absence of conflict, something genuinely new. The treaty required more than spit in a vat. Both sides exchanged hostages to guarantee the peace. This was standard practice in the ancient world, and the Norse gods treated it with the same seriousness that any human king would have. The Vanir sent their most valuable members to Asgard. Njord, the sea god, came to live among the Aesir. His son Freyr came with him. And Freya came. The goddess who had brought Satyr into the Norse pantheon came to live in Asgard and taught the Aesir the magic they had tried to burn out of existence when Gullveig arrived. Odin himself became a practitioner of Satyr, the thing the Aesir had found so threatening that they murdered its first representative 3 times over was now being practiced by their king. The Aesir sent 2 figures to Vanaheim. The first was Hrungnir, described in the sources as tall and handsome, a god who looked exactly like what the Vanir expected an Aesir hostage to be. The second was Mimir, the wisest god in Asgard, a being of such extraordinary knowledge that Odin himself sought his counsel. It went wrong almost immediately. Hrungnir performed well in the Vanir court as long as Mimir was beside him. Mimir would whisper counsel, and Hrungnir would speak with the authority and intelligence that Mimir provided. But when Mimir was absent, Hrungnir had nothing. He would fall silent or say only that others should decide. The Vanir realized what was happening. Hrungnir was a facade. The intelligence they had been given was Mimir's, not Hrungnir's. The Aesir had sent them a handsome figurehead and hidden the actual wisdom behind him. The Vanir were furious. They did not return Mimir to Asgard. They beheaded him, and they sent the head back to Odin. Odin did not bury it. He did not mourn it in the way you would expect. He used herbs and incantations to preserve the head and prevent it from decaying. And then he kept it. He kept Mimir's severed head in a well at the roots of Yggdrasil, and he went to it when he needed counsel, and the head spoke to him. Mimir's well became one of the sacred sites of Norse cosmology. The price of the wisest advice in existence was paying with what you could not get back. Odin would later pay his eye to drink from it. The Aesir-Vanir War ended without a loser. That alone makes it unlike almost every other divine conflict in world mythology. There was no defeated side cast into a pit, no cosmic punishment designed to humiliate the vanquished. Both sides walked away diminished and transformed in equal measure. What the Norse tradition understood and encoded into the very structure of its pantheon was that the gods you end up with are never the gods you started with. The Aesir who welcomed Freya into Asgard were different gods than the ones who had burned Gullveig 3 times. The Vanir who negotiated a peace were different from the ones who had unmade the walls of Asgard. War changes both sides. Peace changes both sides more. The combined pantheon that emerged from the treaty was stronger and stranger than either tribe had been alone. The warrior gods now had access to the deep magic of nature. The nature gods now had the protection of the greatest fortress in the cosmos. And somewhere at the roots of the world tree, a severed head sat in a well and knew everything. And the price of asking it anything was always higher than you expected. The Norse gods had not been born. They had been negotiated into existence, and the world they built from that negotiation was already carrying the seeds of Ragnarok inside it, growing slowly, waiting for the day when no treaty would be enough. The Aesir tried to destroy Gullveig 3 times because her power frightened them. They failed. Then they went to war over it. Then they lost the war. Then they made peace and invited the very thing they feared into their home. Freya taught Odin the magic he had tried to eradicate. Is that wisdom, or is it the oldest pattern in history? Destroy what you fear, fail, then pretend you wanted it all along. Next time on Gods and Empires, we cross to West Africa, to a mythology that most of the world has never heard of, even though it never stopped being practiced. A god who was present before any other deity could set foot on the earth, who took a machete into a primordial forest and cut a path through it so that everyone else could follow, who crossed the Atlantic Ocean in the memories of enslaved people, and who emerged on the other side of that crossing as the spiritual force behind the only successful slave revolution in human history. Ogun is waiting.